Facebook later. So good afternoon, everyone. This is Attorney Robin McCoy, President of Black Women Lawyers of Michigan, and happy Women's History Month. We have two honored guests here today. We have our Michigan Attorney General, Dana Nessel. If you could wave, Attorney General Nessel, so everybody sees you. And then we have the Deputy Legal Director for the state of Michigan. We have Khyla Craine. And I'm going to put it on speaker view on this, and I don't, okay. So, you know, there's been a lot going on in the news, and we're in an election year. And I have had a history of doing voter protection, as I know some of you as well. And I know I did, during the Obama era, I did nonpartisan election protection. And I very much think it's important that we are educated about voting rights, voter protection, in light of what we just saw with the last election and the shenanigans and the crazy folk and all that stuff. So I felt it was important that we have our guest speakers come in and talk about these issues. And then we have an upcoming election. We have our Attorney General, she's up for re-election, and we definitely want to do what we can to support her. But we want to talk about, we want to each have them speak for 10 minutes and then open up for a Q&A and talk about what you know, voting rights, voter protection, the effects of redistricting. I know that I'm seeing that there's going to be a need to educate people about where their district is and who their candidates are. So I'm going to turn it over to Delicia Coleman, Taylor Coleman, our Vice President, to introduce the speakers briefly, and then we'll turn it over to the speakers to give some remarks and then open it up for a Q&A.
Thank you, Madam President. My name is Delicia Taylor Coleman, and I am the Vice President of Black Women's Law Association of Michigan, and we thank our speakers today. We thank you for the contribution you've given as women in the law and the roles that you are currently participating in and the important impact that you're having in our community. First, to introduce our Attorney General, Dana Nessel, who is a former criminal prosecutor and defense attorney and a civil rights attorney. She was sworn in as Michigan's 54th Attorney General on January 1st, 2019. Her core initiatives have been fashioned in the image of her promise to Michigan residents to give the Department of Attorney General back to the people of the state. Since taking office, Attorney General Nessel has been a champion of the state's most important resource, its Great Lakes. Has a very important protection. Her Environmental Protection Division is actively fighting to ensure clean air, water, and energy for Michigan residents. Attorney General Nessel has also created a conviction integrity unit to investigate claims of innocence, which is a very big issue, especially with some of the things going in our nation as a whole, but just overall in our judicial system for years. Attorney General Nessel is a graduate of the University of Michigan and Wayne State University Law School. She lives in Southeast Michigan with her wife, Alana McGuire, and her two sons, Alex and Zach. Thank you, Attorney General Nessel, for appearing for us today. I'm also going to introduce at the same time our second speaker, and then you both can speak as introduced. We thank Ms. Khyla D. Craine. She is the Deputy Legal Director for the Michigan Department of State, where she currently helps guide the Secretary on legal policy and operation issues of the department, which everyone should know. The Department of State oversees elections, motor vehicle credentialing, and the Office of the Great Seal or the State of Michigan. That's like notaries and other licensing and other divisions that is run by the department. Ms. Craine was a previous attorney for NAACP, and she guided the association's leadership team on contract negotiation, corporate governance, and civil rights legal advocacy. She has also co-authored and edited several amicus briefs in federal court. Ms. Craine is from is an Ann Arbor, Michigan native, graduate of Howard University School of Law and South Carolina State University. In 2014, Ms. Craine co-authored an article entitled Returning Citizens, How Shifting Law and Policy in Maryland Will Help Citizens Who Return from Incarceration. Ms. Craine has had many awards, as had Attorney General Nessel, but most recently in 2019, NBA Equal Justice and President's Awardee, Top 40 Under 40 Alumni Award for South Carolina State University, and a member of my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta, and is also involved in the Junior League of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and the National Bar. Welcome both ladies, and thank you for your participation today.
Okay, and Attorney General Nessel, if you could go first.
Sure. Well, first of all, Robin, thank you so much for having me. Thanks to the Black Women's Lawyers Association of Michigan for inviting me here. Khyla, how many times have I seen you this week now? We were together yesterday. So we were together yesterday doing a driver's license restoration fair that we're doing all over the state. About 300,000 Michiganders now eligible to get their driver's license back for the first time in many, many years for a lot of people. And we met earlier because we were talking earlier, we met with MDOS and the MDOC because of the great work she's doing, making sure that people, you know, returning citizens, when they get released, have all of their documents, all of their legal paperwork, so they can, you know, get back into society, get jobs, get a place to live, do all the things that they can't do if they don't have any identification. So she's hard at work, and I did not realize that her resume is actually better than my resume. So how embarrassing for me. But it has been absolutely a treat to be able to work with her. We just did a video yesterday, which I got to find somewhere on the internet. We'll share with you because it's some really important work that her office is doing with my office partnering. And I have to say, like, that's what, when you have, you know, electeds that have the same goals and the same mission, we can do a lot of good for the state of Michigan, believe it or not. So thank you so much for all the great work that you're doing over at MDOS and for working so closely with us. Really appreciate it. I'm gonna go, I have a whole script prepared, but I just wanna say a few things before I get to it. My apologies, as you know, I can't even put my name on the record in like 10 minutes. So, but I got a few other things to say. Number one, for all of you that are running for office, fantastic. We need as many people running for office, but especially, let me say this, running for state office. And when I say that, I mean state representative, state senator. So I got to Lansing, and you know, for those of you who know me, I'm a Wayne County girl. I live in Wayne County. I've spent my entire career in the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice at one table or another. When you get to Lansing, it is bizarre because you have all these people, because of gerrymandering, which thank goodness we're not going to have anymore. The people who are in charge of our state, frankly, are from small towns that none of us have ever heard of. I mean, that's just the truth. And I mean, no disrespect, of course, to our rural communities, and they deserve every bit of representation as the rest of us. But it's hard when you don't have anybody from our major metropolitan areas that are running the state. And I'm not kidding. It's like they've never met a Black person before, sometimes when they get to Lansing. And I'm not even kidding you when I say that. It's a very strange set of circumstances. Let me say this to all the Black women who are on. You are not represented in Lansing, and you need to be. And so you need to run for office. And we have barely any lawyers even. I mean, do you know what? We don't even have, I think we have one lawyer maybe in the state Senate right now, and very few attorneys. We don't, the head of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate is like an asparagus farmer or something. And no disrespect, he would be great on the Agricultural Committee, but not great as you know, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, but we don't have any lawyers. And who knows best how to format the laws than people who practice law? I mean, it's very important. Let me say another thing. A lot of folks are afraid of you guys, and I think that's a good thing. And why do I say that? You know, just this last week, I had to issue 20-year felony offenses against, you know, some racist, terrorists from Ohio, I mean, not to say anything bad about Ohio, but you know, making the most atrocious and horrifying threats against Representative Cynthia A. Johnson and against Representative Sarah Anthony. Let me tell you something. White men don't get those kinds of threats. They do not. They are mostly targeted at women and mostly women of color. And it is my goal that each and every time somebody makes a death threat against a representative in our state, and especially protecting, you know, the Black women who are brave enough to run for office to go to Lansing, that we make sure that you're adequately protected, and that people don't think that they can say these kinds of horrific things and just get away with it. You know, people have First Amendment rights, and they can disagree with you. They can critique your policies. They can't threaten to string you up, you know, by your neck on a tree. And that's the culture that's been cultivated now, that people think it's okay to talk that way. So in my department, my goal was to make the state of Michigan look a little bit more like the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice, to be honest with you, because of the great diversity that, you know, that we've always had in Wayne County, and that is not properly reflected in Lansing. So before I start my actual speech, can I make this pitch to all of you? We need Black women in our office at the Department of Attorney General so badly. We have so many great positions that are open, you guys. We have, do you know, some of our top positions in our civil rights unit, in our elections unit. These are some of the most major cases, not just in the state of Michigan, but in the nation, in the country. You could be defending your state and the people of your state in some of the most impactful ways possible, but it's not going to happen if you don't apply to work at my office. So we have all these openings. It used to be you had to work out of the Lansing office for a lot of these divisions. Not anymore. You can work out of the Detroit office, and we are 60% remote. So that's 2 days a week that you work out of our Detroit office, and the rest of the time you can work from home, except for when you're in court. Of course, you do have to go to court. So that's my pitch before I start my speech. If you want to see better representation in Lansing, you need to come work for the Department of Attorney General. We got lots of work for you to do. And when you think, wow, my voice is not being heard, the state is not being properly represented in terms of all of the very many people that live in our state that need that protection the most, be the change you seek to make, as President Obama said, right? Please apply to my department. We got openings in like all 27 divisions. We need your help. So with that, now I'll go to my regular speech as to what I was asked to talk about, but I just had to get all of that stuff out there. So anyway, thank you so much for the work that all of you do in terms of, you know, community enhancement and your commitment to your organization's mission to facilitate the administration of justice. As you all know, at this moment, these two pillars, one of citizenship and one of democracy, we could not be at a more important time in the history of our state and also the history of our country. And there is no pillar of citizenship that is more essential and fundamental to our democracy, of course, than voting, the right to vote. And this right has been under attack worse than ever in the last few years. In 2013, as many people know, the US Supreme Court ruled that the special scrutiny provision of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was unconstitutional. And this was the provision that prevented certain states with a history of racial discrimination and animus from revising their voting rules. Passing restrictive voting legislation is obviously a way some states are undermining the right to participate in free and fair elections. And, you know, since special scrutiny provisions were removed, you know, dozens of states now have either passed or have presented to their legislatures new voting restrictions that disproportionately affect minority voters. And isn't that the point, by the way? Michigan has such a measure that's working its way through the legislative process right now, and through the ballot proposal process. It's called Secure Michigan Vote, and the supporters are currently in the process of signature gathering. The proposal contains many of the same provisions related to voting that were already vetoed by Governor Whitmer in 2020, who would never sign these. But supporters believe they can gather the 340,000 signatures needed from registered voters to take this proposal to the legislature. And as you all know, if they succeed, they can circumvent the governor's veto and they can pass it without even having her signature attached. So what does Secure Michigan Vote proposal seek to do? Well, for one thing, it toughens Michigan's voter ID requirement by eliminating the option of signing an affidavit for in-person voting in the event that you don't have a picture ID. It requires certain ID verification be provided when applying for an absentee ballot, a requirement that could make absentee voting vulnerable to identity theft. They want you to have to put information on there like part of your social security number, your driver's license, or things like that, even though you already provided everything when you registered to vote in the first place. So this proposal could hinder voter participation by prohibiting the mass mailing of ballot applications, which led to such a successful election, record voter turnout in 2020. And it would limit private election funding and the donations used to pay for polling locations. And currently, many polling locations are provided free of charge to local municipal areas or local municipalities. So in the end, many of the proposals provisions are confusing, they're convoluted, they're unnecessary, and they're just constituting attempts to make voting and the election process as a whole more difficult, and it'll likely lead to the disenfranchisement of voters. The election law changes in the Secure Michigan Vote proposal are predicated on the big lie and the claims that voters have lost faith in the election process. But in reality, they're intended to make it harder for all Michiganders to vote, especially Michiganders of color and for those who are of lower income. Local and county clerks, as well as the Michigan Department of State, have performed numerous audits, I think over 250 of them, since the 2020 election, confirming the results. And again, there has been no data to support the assertion of widespread voter fraud. And if voters have lost faith in the election process, it is because the dissemination of the big lie, not from any credible reports of voter fraud. So the state of Florida has made similar changes, and I didn't think twice about joining 19 other state AGs in opposing Florida's pay to vote law in the United States Court of Appeals. And this law creates voting barriers for formerly incarcerated citizens by requiring them to pay court-ordered financial obligations before they can cast their ballot. Of course, no payment should ever be required to access the ballot box, and this is reminiscent of the poll taxes that were levied in the past by many southern states determined to keep newly enfranchised African Americans from voting. The Florida law effectively disenfranchises people who have already paid their debt to society, and of course, it disproportionately affects Black, Latino, and poor people. So I see the pay to vote law as a flagrant attempt to counteract the 2018 amendment to Florida's Constitution, which was passed by popular vote of Florida residents and automatically restored voting rights to some felons upon completion of all the terms of their sentences. The law keeps almost 1 million Florida residents from exercising their constitutional right to vote. Now, I'm proud to say that Michigan is among 17 states that restore the voting rights of former felons automatically once they're released from prison. And studies show that this benefits both the returning citizen and the communities that they rejoin because it promotes successful reintegration into society by fostering civic participation. It also reduces the likelihood that the returning citizen will commit other crimes. Now, Texas has presented its own attempt at voter suppression by closing absentee ballot drop-off sites, and I joined 18 other state AGs in challenging Texas Governor Greg Abbott's executive proclamation that closed a number of these sites in Texas, resulting in a 1 drop-off site per county. And some of these are huge, massive counties. And it's, of course, just another way to deny voters access to the ballot box and suppress the votes of people of color. Also, requiring citizens to travel very long distances to cast their ballots during the pandemic threatens their lives and their health, as well as the health of their loved ones. Governor Abbott's claim of preventing voter fraud is ridiculous. And as I mentioned earlier, cases of voter fraud are extremely rare, and providing more absentee ballot drop-off sites does not lead to widespread voter fraud. We know this for a fact. What reducing the number of drop-off sites does do is it disproportionately affects communities of color, as well as essential workers who may not have the flexibility to travel to distant drop-off sites. Now, these laws make it clear that Congress absolutely needs to pass the For the People Act of 2021. And I was part of a coalition of attorneys general that sent a letter to congressional leadership supporting this act. The bill is an omnibus package of democratic reforms, and one of those reforms relates to the expanding of access to the ballot. This reform is acutely necessary when in the first 2 months of 2021, the 2021 legislative session, at least 165 bills in 33 states were introduced to restrict voting access, 4 times the number of similar bills introduced the year before. State legislators have seized upon these baseless voter fraud allegations to curtail mail-in voting options and impose, stricter voter ID requirements, limit voter registration opportunities, and allow even more aggressive purging of voter rolls. And I have formally urged congressional leadership to support this legislation for the benefit of our democracy to help ensure greater flexibility in how Americans can cast their ballot. The For the People Act includes several measures that would neutralize efforts to suppress the vote by making it easier to cast ballots. And the act would improve and modernize access to the ballot by requiring states to implement online registration, establishing automatic voter registration, prohibiting unnecessary purging of the voting rolls, requiring states to permit voters in federal elections to submit a sworn statement to meet ID requirements, expanding access to federal elections through early voting and mail-in voting, and prohibiting and knowing dissemination of false information about elections, and stiffening penalties of voter intimidation. So we have to protect the sanctity of our right to exercise our citizenship through voting. And that's why I'm asking for a federal criminal investigation into the 16 Michigan Republicans who submitted falsified certificates claiming to be the presidential electors, even though Joe Biden won Michigan by 154,000 votes, wasn't even close. And Governor Whitmer had already chosen a slate of Democratic electors. And they submitted it, if you can believe it or not, to the United States Senate, to the Western District Chief Judge, to the Secretary of State, and to the National Archivist. It was a coordinated effort on the part of Republicans in 7 battleground states to push the false narrative that Trump had won Michigan in 2020, and they almost succeeded in doing so. And what these Republicans did is their actions constituted forgery of a public record, and these individuals should be held accountable for their actions, just as we see all the time when anybody, forges a document and submits it to a bank, they get charged with a 14-year felony. We charge cases all the time where there is voter fraud. Somebody fills out an application, for instance, in someone else's name. They get time, they get charged. These people tried to undermine an election of 5.5 million people, and they should be held accountable as well. So the governor, the Secretary of State, and I have all collaborated also in seeking the disbarment of several attorneys who pushed a false election fraud narrative in legal proceedings before multiple courts and judges, even taking these false arguments all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And I have filed motions seeking for sanctions against these attorneys for knowingly filing false complaints and using their law license in an attempt to disenfranchise Michigan voters and undermine the public's faith in our elections. And for these offenses, they should lose their right to practice law. Their untruths caused our country to have civil unrest, and they caused violence, and they planted the seeds that resulted in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. I actually testified against Sidney Powell before the Texas Attorney Grievance Commission, and it's my pleasure to say that they've decided to move forward and discipline her, and it is likely that myself and the Secretary of State will be testifying in her disciplinary hearing. Now, no one, of course, has presented any evidence of widespread voter fraud, and on the rare occasions when voter or election fraud have been uncovered, my department has acted swiftly and decisively to ensure that those offenders are held accountable. So my office has filed charges against 9 individuals in relation to the 2020 election. Those cases account for less than 60 instances of voter fraud out of 5.5 million. So when you do the math, that's 0.04% of President Biden's margin of victory. And that's why Donald Trump did not ask for a recount, which he would have been entitled to do under law had he wanted to, and he wanted to pay the fees associated, but he knew there was no way that you could overcome 154,000 deficit. So he didn't even try. Now, procedurally, reports of voter fraud are often first reported to local law enforcement or the Michigan Bureau of Elections, and then they get routed to the Michigan State Police or to my office if investigators believe criminal activity has occurred. And for their hard work in upholding the integrity and accuracy of our elections. So we will not tolerate having our system of free and fair elections undermined, and we will not hesitate to prosecute anyone who tries to undermine our democracy, regardless of political party. Now, the cases I mentioned do not justify in any way, shape, or form altering Michigan's election laws, and we have laws on the books that provide consequences for those who attempt to tamper with elections. And we can't tolerate any attempts to disenfranchise voters through misinformation campaigns either. So some of you may be familiar with the Berkman and Wohl cases, and those two men were political operatives that were charged with orchestrating a series of robocalls aimed at suppressing the vote in 2020 by targeting voters in the city of Detroit. And this robocall message warned people about private information to the man, for real, and urged them to be aware of vote by mail. And they threatened that, information would be shared with creditors, or if you had bench warrants, that this would come out and arrest you. So, we flew our folks out, our agents out to California. We executed a search warrant in conjunction with the California AG's office. We arrested those guys, and now they're pending trial in the Wayne County Circuit Court for a variety of felonies. We have started 2022 with our eyes wide open to any anti-democratic strategies, and we're prepared for the challenges that lie ahead. The Anti-Democracy Playbook is honestly very simple. Change the rules, change the referees, so you can change the results. That being the case, thank you so much for having me here and for being able to speak on these subjects. I know as attorneys, we share a deep and abiding respect for the rule of law. And as the top law enforcement officer in the state, I hope I can be a resource for all of you in promoting reform and facilitating the administration of justice. So thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you, Attorney General Nessel, sorry. And then now we have Khyla. I know I keep calling you Khyla. I have a couple Khylas in my life, but Khyla Craine to give us some remarks about this topic as well. So I'll turn it over to Khyla. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you all, my sisters in the law, for having me here today. And yes, it's a pleasure to be with you again, Attorney General Nessel. It's been great to partner with your office on the variety of issues that I work on behalf of the Secretary. So thank you very much for your partnership. And as the Attorney General stated, well, before I begin, I'd be remiss if I didn't say hello to my sorors on the line of Delta Sigma Theta. Thank you for being here and supporting the work that we do, particularly Judge Perry, who's in my chapter, Ann Arbor alumni, as well as my friend and fellow member of the National Bar Association Board of Governors, Kimberly Ward. Thank you, Kimberly Ann Ward, because I know there's two Kimberly Wards. Thank you for being here as well. So again, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here on behalf of Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson to tell you a little bit about the work that we're doing in our office as it pertains to elections and protecting the right to vote, but also making sure that everybody has an equal and unfettered access to the vote. I just definitely want to level set a little bit just to make sure that you are aware of all the things that have happened since the Secretary took office, along with Attorney General Nessel on January 1st of 2019, and then where we are as we're heading into the 3 elections that will be taking place in 2022. So if you remember in 2018, in November in 2018, when you elected Secretary Benson to serve as Secretary of our great state, we also voted on 2 different propositions. Proposition 2, which created the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, which has completed its work in December, as well as you voted in Proposition 3, which changed the Constitution and enshrined in our Constitution some very forward-thinking provisions, such as automatic voter registration, making no excuse absentee ballot, which really changed the game and was very helpful for us when we look at 2020. And then we put those items into place when we came into office in 2019, looking to send out all of the applications for the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission as the new constitutional provision required. And hopefully you got some of those applications and completed those applications. And then we assembled the commission in late 2019. As we were gearing up for 2020, we knew it was going to be a busy year because we had the 2020 census, we had preparing for the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, and we knew that the 2020 presidential election was going to be a monumental one. One thing that we did not think about was a global pandemic. And as you recall, we have been in the middle of this global pandemic for actually 2 years and 1 week. 2020 hit us very hard when COVID-19 came about. Actually, the day after our presidential primary on March 13th of 2020, Governor Whitmer shut down the state to protect us from spreading COVID-19, and it still was spreading like wildfire. And so the secretary put into place several things so that we could have a safe and secure election. Unlike other states, we did not move our elections. Some postponed their elections. We did not. We just made some pivotal changes so that we could have our safe and secure elections. So we sent out PPE to all of our local clerks to make sure that they had sanitizers, face masks, face shields, and other things so that they can ensure that when folks wanted to come into person to vote, they would be able to do so safely. But because of our 2018 provision that anybody who is registered to vote can vote from home, we sent out applications to all registered voters in the state to let them know that you do have the right to vote absentee, and you need to complete an absentee ballot application, send it to your local clerk's office so that they can then send you an absentee ballot. Because of the work that the secretary did and because of the work that entities like yours did, ours did, we had the most safe, secure election of our history. As Attorney General Nessel said, 5.5 million people voted in the 2020 election. And despite what you have heard on various news outlets across the country, our election was safe and secure, and it was ratified by audits several times over. The lingering effects of our 2020 election bled over into 2021, far into 2021. And we really do have to thank Attorney General Nessel and her team, who we were constantly speaking with because of the varied amount of lawsuits that emanated after the 2020 election. About 70 different lawsuits were filed against the secretary in our office based upon the 2020 election. And so we were working with the elections team in Attorney General Nessel's office to combat those. We also had the incident at TFC I call it Coble Hall, so it's really difficult for me to call it, or TCF, that's what it is, where we were continuing to finish the ballot process for Detroit. And we had folks come in, and it was very disruptive and quite triggering for many of the people that were just trying to do their civic duty to ensure that those ballots, those absentee ballots were processed as they were supposed to do. But we are also grateful, though, that's the bad part, but we were also grateful that there were so many people that wanted to lean into the process. They became election inspectors, or called poll workers, where they volunteered to spend their time to work the poll for the very long day on election day in November. They also became absentee ballot counters. So they went to the absentee ballot counting boards, and they were there to review and to process absentee ballots all across the state. Over 20,000 people volunteered to participate in one way and the other in our Democracy MVP program, which was to recruit folks to participate as election inspectors or our absentee ballot county boards. And that is still available to folks today. You can volunteer, you can go online to michigan.gov/vote or michigan.gov/SOS and look at our Democracy MVP program if that is something that is interesting to you to participate in our elections. And you don't have to wait until November, of course, because we have an election in May, which is our local elections. We have an election in August, which is our state primaries. And then we have the November general election. We're moving on to 2021, where we were participating in many different town halls, over 140 different public town halls during the redistricting process, as just regular Michiganders were participating as members of the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. The secretary is an ex officio non-voting member of the commission, and so we had a representative there at every meeting. Public, you can watch it on YouTube. You can actually go back to the secretary's YouTube page and watch those sessions, as well as those Michiganders were going over the maps. They were listening to Michiganders talk about their perspective about maps even before the maps were drawn. And then once the maps were drawn, they were listening to Michiganders about what they felt about those maps, and then making any adjustments as they saw fit. And then in December of 2021, the commission completed its job and solidified those maps, which are being felt through our Bureau of Elections, and they're putting the maps into the system so that we can know what our new district lines are. Because of reapportionment, as you know, after the census comes reapportionment, we found out that we are losing one member of our the congressional delegation, which automatically shifts who is going to represent you in Congress. And so after the Bureau of Election is finished with its work, every person in the state of Michigan who is registered to vote will receive a new voter registration card from their local election official, because you need to find out who is going to represent you in Congress, as well as the state level as a state representative or state senator, along with your other elected officials. And now here we are in 2022. We are gearing up aggressively for the election. We realize that COVID-19 has not loosened its grip on our state or on our nation. And so we are preparing to ensure that anybody that wants to go vote in person can do so safely and securely. We are going to continue with our PPE. We're also continuing to do outreach, just like us coming here to talk with you all, to ensure that all Michiganders understand that they have the right to vote, that they can do so securely, and also to hear from communities, particularly communities of color, who may have questions about the redistricting process and about the elections process in particular. As Attorney General Nessel said, there were 39 bills that were contemplated by the state legislature that the Secretary's office did oppose. and that the governor, thankfully, has also opposed as well. But we know that the fight for voter suppression is not over with those bills. And so we need to make sure that we are not just hearing from myself or from the Attorney General, but we are spreading this information, the correct information about how you access your ballot, how you do participate to vote, what is the requirements for you to register to vote, and then how do you protect the vote on or before Election Day. And so we are recruiting, as I stated before, not only folks to participate in our Democracy MVP program, but we encourage you to participate in any type of election protection, legitimate election protection program that is out there. I know that there are entities like the League of Women Voters, the Lawyers Committee for Civil and Human Rights, the National Bar Association, Delta Sigma Theta, and our Divine Nine Sisters and Brothers, who are all doing something around election protection. So I do encourage us, as we have these special skills as lawyers, to utilize them in the best way possible to ensure that everyone does have the equal and unfettered right to vote. Not only that, but as we are looking at going forward, of course, as Attorney General Nessel said, you have the opportunity to run for office. And while filing deadlines are concluding very quickly, you can look online to see how you can become a candidate. If you go to michigan.gov/elections with an S, and consider to run for office. While we can't opine from our vantage point about winners and losers necessarily, we can provide you with the information to run for office, and do encourage you so to do. So I'm going to keep my comments short because the Attorney General did highlight a lot of the things that we would like to say as far as elections are concerned, and would love to answer some of your questions. The last thing that I will say, however, is that, again, really proud of the collaboration that we worked with Attorney General Nessel's office on misinformation and disinformation. And we have an email address called misinformation@michigan.gov. So if you are hearing things from clients or just folks in the community generally about voter suppression, you can email that to us. We vet those emails to see whether or not they are significant enough that we need to forward those on to the Attorney General's office, and then they take it from there to determine what they need to do if they want to file any type of criminal charges, like the one that she just spoke about with the robocalls. Those issues are pervasive, particularly in our urban centers, and we want to make sure that we can get ahead of those as early as possible, because we know that a lie can circle around the world twice before the truth gets up in the morning. And so we want to make sure that we're able to put the correct information out there in the community so that the community knows exactly what they need to do to be able to exercise their right to vote. So again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here on behalf of Secretary Benson, and would love to answer any question that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Craine and Attorney General Nessel. What I want to ask about is, I know that, so we, at our last meeting, we had Attorney Todd Perkins come in and talk about the redistricting lawsuit and what happened with that it did not prevail. And my understanding is that there are some other pending lawsuits. Can you enlighten us about those issues? And so I guess it's the lawsuits, and then the other issue is, what efforts are being made to educate people about the new districts? Because people are already like, what, where's the district? I mean, I know that there's maps and things like that, but so those are two parts. I'll start with Attorney General Nessel.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, even though the Department of Attorney General generally represents all of the state agencies and commissions, and certainly the Department of State and the governor's office, we do not represent the Redistricting Commission. And that was done intentionally. And honestly, I think that was a phenomenal idea by the drafters. You shouldn't have somebody who is a partisan, AG. When I say partisan, we're either a Democrat or a Republican. representing this very, very important commission. They have their own attorney, actually. And I think that that is really for the best. There were a number of suits that were filed. Some were from Democratic stakeholders, some from Republican stakeholders. None of them have been successful so far. And I think what's important about that, quite honestly, is that, we be able to know what the districts are as early as possible and be able to make the filing deadlines and not have to extend them. And that way people can actually start campaigning. And I know, of course, people have in the districts that they're going to be trying to serve in. And by extending it, I will say, I think it would have been very, very problematic. So far, again, none of those lawsuits have been successful, but to not know what the districts are going to be, the longer you go on, the harder it's going to be for candidates. I will say this, and then again, this is just my personal perspective on it, and this is not a legal perspective. I like the fact that just in terms of fairness, I think that, we had so many Democratic votes that were just being thrown away, and you would see time and again, more people voting for Democrats in the House or Senate, but then having far fewer Democratic representatives because of the ridiculous gerrymandering. I know that there are a lot of folks in the African-American community, especially in Detroit, who feel as though the districts will not fairly represent them, that there'll be fewer African-Americans in the legislature as a result. Here's my thought, just generally speaking on that. I think to say that, I think we're at a place now with the Democratic Party, and I hope I'm not proven wrong in saying this, but I think that a Democrat who is an African-American has just as good of a chance as winning as someone who is Caucasian or someone who is of some other racial background. I mean, I think that Democrats are at the point where, there's not going to be that type of discrimination. We'll be just as happy to vote for somebody who's African-American as somebody who is of another race. I could be wrong about that. And I don't want to see fewer African-Americans represented in either the state House or the state Senate. But I will say that these maps are more fair in terms of the fact that we'll get more Democrats into office. And by getting more Democrats into office, we will have better racial policies in place. So I understand the downside, but I see the upside as well. And I certainly hope that there's no one who's deterred from running just because these areas are going to extend from Detroit into suburban areas in the metro area. So again, there's good and there's bad, but I think we're still going to have a lot of African-American representation as long as we have enough people running.
Okay, and then Attorney Craine, if you could respond to that.
Yeah, so there are a couple, as the Attorney General said, there are a couple of lawsuits that are still pending. They have not been successful. There's one case that is still before the Western District, a 3-court panel in the Western District of Michigan, wondering whether or not the one person, one vote provision is being upheld by these current maps. But here's the thing. As the Attorney General said, the maps that we have from 2011 are not fair for Black representation, right? Because of how they have packed Black people into particular districts. If you saw from the discussion that was happening during the commission hearings, you saw that there are districts that are 90, 80% Black, which is unnecessary for the Black community to be able to elect a candidate of its choice. So by unpacking those districts, it does allow for more people to be able to influence districts, to influence more districts. Now, there is a common thread in the community, and I might need to take off my Secretary of State hat and put my Delta hat on really quick. I chaired census and redistricting efforts for Delta. But what I will say to that is that we have to show up at the primary and vote at the primary. And we also have to look at how many people are running in said primary, because those two things alone could determine the issue around Black representation and participation in the state House and state Senate, right? So we have to make sure that we are letting folks know that you don't need to wait until November, that there are 3 elections every year in the state of Michigan. And we need to participate in all 3, in particular into the primary. That's the first thing. The second thing that I'll say is that the Bureau of Elections is working very, very hard to finalize this so that you can get your new voter registration cards, and that will tell you what district that you're in for not just the congressional races, but as I stated before, all races across the local, state, federal. But then you need to go either to our website on the michigan.gov website, or on your county level to see exactly, you know, how your map or how your district looks and who's in your district. But I think that for the Black political representation question that was in the chat box, is part of it is going to be up to us, because whether or not we like the districts, these are the districts that we have until somebody successfully sues and the court makes us change them. And so, and I'm not advocating that that happen either way, but what I am saying is that we're going to have to make sure that we get folks out, that we tell folks that the power is now in your hands to determine how these districts impact us. And so if you decide not to participate in the election, then you can potentially connect that to a loss of Black political participation. But the power is, as it always has been, but the power definitely now is in our hands to determine who represents us in the state legislature and in Congress.
Yeah, and can I follow up on that, Robin,
sure.
for 1 second?
Yeah.
I think it was interesting. There was an article today, I want to say it was in the Free Press, but I don't remember where I read it, but it had to do with the, I think it's the new 13th congressional district. And it talked about the fact that what sometimes happens is you'll have, you know, a large number of African-Americans that'll run in a district, and then maybe you'll have somebody who's not African-American, and then the African-American candidates split up the vote. And how really what might have to happen, and I know this is really hard because there's a lot of egos involved, people just decide, here's the candidate that we're going to get behind, so that you can ensure that you have that representation and not just split up the vote, and then someone else who's not as reflective of the community that they're serving, the district that they're, you know, proposing to serve, isn't as reflective because all the votes have been split up. I don't know if that's something that can really happen. And in fact, I think for that district, like, I know everybody who's running. So I don't know if those individuals are going to be able to come together and say, hey, let's all, like, I don't know if you're going to rock, paper, scissor it or something, or, you know, I don't know how that would happen. But I will say that, you know, that is a likely outcome, potentially, depending on how some of these races go. So, you know, just, I guess, food for thought.
Yeah, and I know we've had with some of the other groups that I've been involved with, we have had talks about that, because strategically, like after the redistricting, it would have made more sense as opposed to having everybody grouped together and then the possibility of dividing the Black vote. So yeah, that is definitely something for consideration. Delicia, I know, did you have some questions to ask the panelists?
Yes, I do. What protections are being put in place to ensure that everyone's right to vote is protected and will be allowed? Because, you know, with all the lawsuits and the different things happening nationwide, but also attempting to be happening right here in our very communities, how do individuals know where to vote, when they'll be allowed to vote, what access they'll be allowed? How is that information getting out to our communities?
Well, if you don't mind me starting on this one, first of all, you would have to write an entire novel, I think, to put together all the things that myself and my office and Secretary Benson and her office did for the 2020 election. I think that she and I did something like 120 town halls together. I mean, honestly, we did our best to communicate as much as possible. I did a bunch of, PSAs, and so did Secretary Benson. We tried as hard as we could to get the information out to everyone. And I will say this, it kind of worked. A lot of people voted, right? So it's hard to say that was not effective. One of the challenges that we had last time is that the laws were constantly changing. There were so many lawsuits. And so the secretary and I had to come up with a plan so that irrespective of how those lawsuits went, people would still know how to vote, where to vote, and when to vote for their vote to count, and what exactly they had to do. So it was just this constant pushing back against the misinformation and disinformation that we were being flooded with. And, MDOS would, in the Bureau of Elections would constantly be reporting stuff to us. We had to go after a whole bunch of folks that were putting out misinformation on social media. Some of them actually were friendly actors, but they just had the information wrong. And then they'd get really mad and be like, why are you making us take this down? Be like, because it's wrong. That's why you have to take it down, because people are all it takes is for a person to look at, you could just have a couple thousand people look at one wrong website and boom, now you've disenfranchised those voters. So we were really, really aggressive about it. And I will say that the secretary's office and my office worked really well together on this. We are going to do the same thing. The other thing that we did is that the secretary, myself, and the governor, we had regular meetings starting in the summer of 2020. And we tried to envision every conceivable set of circumstances that folks would pull to try to, undermine the vote. And so things that were widely reported that you saw, right? Like, what if the Wayne County Board of Canvassers splits and doesn't vote to certify? What if the State Board of Canvassers splits and doesn't vote to certify? What if Lee Chatfield, the speaker, and Majority Leader Mike Shirkey get flown to the Oval Office and have a chat with Donald Trump, and they try to put a plan into place to somehow try to override or undermine the certification process? Believe it or not, we had strategies in place for all these things, and we actually had briefs that were pre-written to the best of our ability to try to anticipate any set of circumstances. Now, we didn't get everything right. There were some things that happened that neither the secretary or myself or anybody who worked with us could see. Did I think that Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton would file a suit at the United States Supreme Court to try to decertify the elections of 4 different swing states? No, that was not on my bingo card. Now, we won that lawsuit, but did I think that was going to happen? No, I was very shocked by that. So what we're going to have to do is just be as prepared as possible, work across state lines with as many groups nationally as possible, and just do everything we can to be ready and to get the information out to everybody so that they will know, again, how to vote, where to vote, when to vote, to make sure their vote counts. And in my case, I sued the Postal Service. I went to the Postal Service with a court order in my hand to make the folks at the United States Postal Service at the distribution centers in Pontiac and in Detroit deliver the ballots to the clerks. They had just been sitting there postmarked for 4 or 5 weeks. And I had to run around and go, there's a ballot, there's a ballot, there's a ballot. Did I expect that to happen? I did not. I did not know that would happen, but we had to be nimble and we had to be ready, and we had to be ready to sue in order to protect people's rights. And we'll be ready to do so again in 2022. It's going to be a little harder for us, admittedly, this time because the secretary and I are both up. We're both running. We could spend all our time preparing for this before. Now we got to try to keep our offices too. So it's going to be even harder this time around, but we're going to do everything we possibly can. And I'm sorry, that was a long answer, Khyla. I'm sure you have more to add.
No, the only thing that I would have to add, Attorney General, is that go to trusted sources. So our website, I'm gonna say it again, michigan.gov/SOS or michigan.gov/elections is a trusted site. Partners that that do this, that are nonpartisan, that just try to give you straight up information, like the League of Women Voters, like your office, like NAACP, like Delta Sigma Theta, trusted organizations that is just going to give you the information. Go to those sites. Do not go to axillary sites that you've never heard of to give you information about your elections. Also, make sure that when you get your new voter registration card, you hold on to it, because that will give you the information about where you are to vote. It won't give you when, but at least give you know, for the most part, where you are to vote. So those are the things that will be the only thing that I would add to that.
Okay, and so we're coming up on time. I see it's 5 o'clock, and I do appreciate our guest speakers, Attorney Dana Nessel and Attorney Khyla Craine, for joining us for this lively discussion. You know, I know that, you know, I've been active back into the time of Gore Lieberman with election protection, and with Obama, I was the Obama campaign. I was working with the Obama campaign and nonpartisan election protection. We started in the summertime. So ladies, that's why I'm like, I know we have the primary in August, the general election in November. As Attorney Craine said, we have elections in May. So it's like, we got to be on it. And because there are some special people out there. And and as Attorney General Nessel, she's up for re-election. So is Jocelyn Benson and our governor. And so we just, and I want to give a special thank you for Attorney General Nessel. As you guys know, that expungement is one of my babies, and it makes a world of difference when you have legislators, when you have an attorney general, when you have a governor that is supportive of expungement. I mean, Judge Thomas and myself, we traveled around the state educating people about expungement, but with the old laws, we had to turn a lot of people away. We had to do job fairs, and it's more expansive. To me, it still needs to be expanded more. That's part of why I'm running for state rep. But I definitely want to give a shout out to Attorney General Dana Nessel for, it makes a difference when you have somebody in your corner in office. That makes a world of difference. And then Attorney Khyla Craine for being here, for representing, and for sharing the knowledge. And you know, we did share some of the information that was provided about the events that you guys had. So be sure to share that information with us further, and at events that you're having, because knowledge is power. I always come back to that. Hosea 4:6, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Knowledge is power. So it's 5 o'clock. I see somebody, oh, Khyla, you have your hand raised? Okay.
Yeah, I would be remiss before we go if I did not plug the clinics that Attorney General also talked about at the top of her remarks that we're doing in partnership with her office, the Road to Restoration clinics that we'll be doing all across the state, that are trying to educate Michiganders about their road to be able to retain or regain their privilege to drive. We need volunteer attorneys, and frankly, we need volunteer attorneys of color, because we know that this disproportionately impacts people of color. We just were in Dearborn yesterday to a great event, and the Attorney General was gracious enough to drop by. And we'll be going to Grand Rapids and Muskegon, Flint, Pontiac, as well as Detroit. So if you are interested, please do sign up. You can go to our website, michigan.gov/SOS Clean Slate, to volunteer for one or even more clinics. It's really pivotal that we help our Michiganders understand these new laws and how they're able to get their driving privileges back.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Craine. And again, we're coming up on the hour, so I want to thank you, ladies, and happy Women's History Month. Although just like with Black History Month, we're women year-round. So all power to the women, power to the people, and everybody have a blessed day. And we're recording this. This will be shared on our social media. We'll send it to our guest speakers to share on their social media. Knowledge is power, and everybody just get out there, we can't just sit there watching TV. We got to get out there and get in the streets and make sure that we make a difference in the world. So be blessed, and everybody have a great day.
Hi, everybody.
you.
Thank you. Great, excellent presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Meeting. Thank you to both of the attorneys and the Attorney
you.
General.